Okay, welcome back. I think we'd all like to warmly say a big thank you to Jamila and Alexandrina for a very wonderful, intriguing, provocative performance piece. I feel like we're sort of borrowing your space, so thank you. And just to say that Jamila and Alexandrina will be they're doing a run of O at the Yard, so and you will have an opportunity for further discussion there, and so there's more of an opportunity to see it. So that's tremendous. My name's Jacky Lansley. I'm a choreographer and performance artist, and the artistic director of the Dance Research Studio. I'm also a founder of Chisenhale Dance Space. And I'd just like to just very briefly introduce our panel of speakers, who will say more about themselves in a minute. So fantastic, we have Charlotte Vincent and Anna Furs, and you've already met Alexandra, Drina and Jamila. Great, fantastic. So I suggested to the organisers of this event that we brought together a small group of speakers, and then we could sort of open up the discussion. And I invited everyone to speak for 5 minutes, very broadly to think about sort of 3 kind of general questions. What do you think of the achievements for women dance practitioners over the last few decades, being positive? What are the main challenges facing women dance practitioners today? And where does your own practice engage with these issues? So broad parameters. So everyone's going to talk around those sorts of themes in a minute. So I'll kick off first, and I'll use my time to contextualise a bit. In terms of sort of achievements, I thought historical. I'm one of the first generation of new dance practitioners, and in the 70s, I felt I was able to articulate my experience as a woman and as a dancer, very much inspired by a broader context of political change, and feminism was central to this broader context. A reflection of this was a major interview in the seminal feminist magazine Spare Rib in 1977, in which Anna Furs interviewed me. The title was Off Our Toes, and Anna asked the question, how can dance be a medium for exploring political ideas? Which I thought was a good question, still is. We talked about the psychology of objectification of women within dance. Quote, the dancer's training is like an intensified experience of growing up female, working with your own image in the mirror all the time. We discussed the then rebellion against romantic and classical images and the postmodern strategies of deconstruction which undermined them, which I think we saw some of those strategies in your event tonight. Further discussion, obviously. Spare Rib was a dominant voice in feminist discussion within the UK and abroad at the time. And I think it was fantastic that it ran as a main feature an interview about women and experimental dance. There was a rash of journals about experimental arts at that time, and organisations, including, of course, New Dance magazine, which produced its own women's issue, number 15, which is really worth a look. Lots of very interesting pieces. So just carrying on a little bit further with the slightly historical backdrop. So feminism gave us a model And in 1990, Christy Adair published her book Women and Dance, which collected together a range of perspectives and voices through the 70s and 80s, including the work of the X6 Collective and others who spearheaded the new dance movement. A movement which placed the discussion of women central to it. She cites my work, Anna's work, Emmeline Clade's work, Rosemary Butcher, Mary Fulkerson, Liz Aggis, Rosemary Lee, the Chomleys, and many others. It's a little bit before your time, Charlotte.
Yeah, I'm not in that.
Not all, I would suggest, saw themselves as part of a broader women's movement, but who nevertheless had been informed by, and I think they would agree, inspired by, certainly given strategies by. We looked at, through performances in diverse site-specific spaces, alternative training, discussion, writing, collaboration, we looked at issues such as the body as commodity, oppressive archetypes and narratives. In performances, we played with these archetypes using postmodern techniques of parody, deconstruction, cabaret, protest art, and interdisciplinarity. Anything, really, that would kind of, do the trick. Central to the feminist art movement was the idea that women's experience must and could be expressed through art, where it had previously been trivialised. The personal is political. So the image in one of the new dance magazines, The Bleeding Fairies, with the red crayon sort of on her crutch, which was an image of menstruation. That was a piece made by Emily, myself, and Mary Prestige. For example, referencing menstruating, and that kind of link to visual art work, such as Mary Kelly's postpartum nappy piece, in which she worked with soiled nappies in a gallery, and which caused an absolute riot in Britain at the time. So work in which women's sexuality was being placed within art practice. One of the works I made here in Chisenhale, a child's play, looked at the oppression and marginalisation of children and their carers. I'm going to talk about that on November the 9th. So very briefly, what happened in between. Adair says, and I agree with her, in the 1980s, with the increase of reactionary values both in Britain and the USA, avant-garde dance became more diffuse and fragmented, and political zones tended to disappear. Big discussion there. We all need to sort of remember that was the moment when Thatcher came in and arts funding was cut. It had a huge impact on the arts. New dance particularly found it exceedingly difficult to survive in that climate. Some areas developed, I think, community and education work, and I think also a big emphasis, positive work around somatic training, new kinds of training. But I think new dance performance as an art form got completely neglected and abandoned, I would argue. More or less. They're resourceful, always resourceful exceptions. And I think, we need to remember that, and sometimes I've been a little sad, with the sort of divisiveness and competitiveness, that actually it's often external political forces that are actually causing the problems, it's rather than the differences between ourselves. Question, does the pluralism of postmodernism offer a kind of freedom, or does the endlessly flexible boundary of postmodernism fit well into a kind of industrialised commodity culture which is constantly craving the new? Certainly postmodernism created cultural strategies which have been colonised in the marketplace and perhaps divorced from their original meaning and politics. The critic Luke Jennings recently wrote in The Stage, why, when British dance was founded by women like Nanette de Valois and Marie Rambert, and has always employed more women than men, are there no high-profile women choreographers? A few quotes from his article, which is rather useful, I think. It's 14 years since a woman was commissioned to create a main stage ballet at the Royal Opera House. If this were true of women playwrights at the National Theatre or female artists at the Tate, there would be an outrage. Even in contemporary dance, historically a territory marked out by choreographic pioneers such as Martha Graham and Pina Bausch, men are much more prominent than women. In the UK, the female choreographers are there. Fleur Darkin, Shobana Yersing, Charlotte Vincent and others have been diligently carving out careers for years, but it's almost always their male colleagues, even the less experienced ones, who get the big commissions. I'm sure you've seen that piece, Charlotte.
I've helped write that piece.
Yeah. In the words of Fleur Darkin, choreographer and artistic director of Scottish Dance Theatre, institutions are biased against female achievement systematically, not because individuals are misogynist, it's in the culture. Okay, so that's a bit of the backdrop and what happened in between. In my own work, very briefly, just a few things. I am very rigorous about visual and movement imagery. I try to avoid sexist imagery all the time in all the pieces of work I made. That, of course, is quite complex. I made a piece called Holding Space recently, which honours my space as a woman, holding the radical space and honouring the journey of spaces, Chisenhale X6 and now DRS, Dance Research Studio. At DRS, I mentor, advise, offer space to many young women. There's very much a sense of collective there, combined with a sense of my leadership drawing on my experience, and I'm happy to be able to offer that. I write as much as possible. Keep writing your own history. You cannot assume it will be written for you. Great. I think I'll finish. So,
I don't know, do we want to go?
Who would like to? Would you like to go next, Sean?
I'm happy to go next unless you feel the urge.
Go
Okay,
ahead.
hello everybody. Thanks for staying here. Jackie asked us to think about three different questions, and the first one I sort of slightly neglected, but I'll speak very quickly so that I can get all my thoughts out that I had on the train coming up here. So the main achievements for female dance practitioners over the past few decades, what are they? I would say they are simply, we've continued. And that takes some doing. So that would be my main one. And then I was thinking about I think collaboration is quite a female form. I'm just going to stick my neck out and say that it's an inclusive, potentially female form. And those of us who do work on the middle scale often try to flatten the hierarchical structure a little bit to acknowledge the people that we collaborate with. I call my company an ensemble, not, it's my name on the door, as it were, but we very much work as a collaborative practice together. I think crossing disciplines, all the things that Jackie's mentioned, experimental female-led work, I think that's where you need to look if you want to find the pioneers. In my opinion. I think just from a personal point of view, I know that in the 90s I was hugely impacted by watching performers like Liz Agus, like Wendy Houston in DV8, like Louise Le Clavalier in La 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 Human Steps, and just going, fuck me, women can do that. Mm-hmm. So for me it was a sort of really amazing physicality that kind of drew my attention when I first started making work, and my interest has always been physicality and intellectuality. So as you said, the person is political. The minute you step into a light or onto a stage and you separate yourself from being there to here, that's a political act. So that's what's always driven my own practice. So in answer to Jackie's question, I think it really is that we've continued somehow. But there's also a really big question that keeps emerging about women's practice, which is how do we measure success? Because I think we might measure it slightly differently to men. Mm. So then the next question was, what are the main challenges facing women dancers working today? And I just listed a few, and they're pretty obvious actually, but I'm just going to say them anyway. I think they're a mix of practical, psychological and emotional challenges that women face, amongst other things. First one, when and if to have children. The timing, do you wait until you're established and you've got a career and then pop a sprog? Or do you wait and then it's too late and then you remain childless and that's an unhappy place for some women. So that dichotomy is a constant battle in any business, actually, but in our business particularly, because the focus is so much on bodies and keeping them fit and not being a different shape to anyone else. So when and if to have children is a real challenge for women dancers. I work with mothers and fathers in my company, and I know the fathers have an easier ride. That doesn't mean they don't feel it any less, but they're not the ones that tend to stay at home, and they're not the ones that bring their kids on tour. Although one of them recently did. Because I support that as a thing, which I'll get onto later. Another challenge, if you're freelance, it's really difficult, isn't it? Most independent dancers who make interesting work are freelancers, and so what you don't have is the support of a company structure around you with things like maternity or adoption leave, pay when you're off, and you're financially dependent on earning your own living. And so when you become a mother, very often for the first time, you're either dependent on your partner, which as a feminist is hard work, if you're not used to that, or you're just skint so you can't have kids anyway. So there's lots of issues to unpack in that. Third thing, I think the challenge towards female dancers in the world that we work in is body fascism. It still exists. It's amazing watching your bodies. You've got amazing bodies. Thank you for sharing with us your bodies with us this evening. But dancers are still supposed to look and behave in a certain way. And I work with some quite mature dancers now, and we kind of walk into a studio and we have a running joke in my company about how we're supposed to behave now. I think we're supposed to lie in semi-supine. I think we're supposed to get our dance pants on. And we're like, fuck that. Don't care. Just wear your outdoor clothes and let's see what happens. We want to sort of break the rules a bit. There's such a dancerly behaviour that we all adopt that's really boring. Crack it open. I think that dance generally in this country is incredibly unpolitical. It's still obsessed with an easy emphasis on form and moving wallpaper. And I think we can say a lot. We can say a hell of a lot with physicality, visuality, sweat, blood, emotion. We can say huge amounts. We can move the world if we want to, but we have to mix body work with intelligence. And I think there's very few political dance makers in this country, and I think that women are always political when they make work. And for me, there's a question about how can we make work that's feminist work without appearing angry? Because actually, I'm too old to be angry now. How can we just stand up for equality and run our companies and make our work and provoke our audience in a way that is a provocation, but it's not necessarily an angry one? The existing power structures in dance organisations and in the dance world remain hierarchical, they remain choreographer-led, which means that we're actually working to a patriarchal system. And what about flattening those structures? And what about teaching in circles? And what about collaboration? That's what we're really good at as dancers. We need to keep pushing for that politics of how we behave in a studio and not go for the master model, which is a male model. It's not helping us. I think we need to provide conditions for returning to work. I've asked this many times over the last few years, how many men in positions running middle-scale companies like me put childcare into their budgets or accommodate nursery shorter days, take their kids on tour? It's really expensive. I don't see my feminist brothers standing up for this. They don't do it. A lot of them don't do it. I do it. Because I want to support women coming back to work. When they've had kids. And where are our feminist brothers? I asked that at the Female Choreographers Conference recently. We stand up for racial equality, we stand up for gay rights, we stand up for disability rights. I don't hear many male choreographers standing up for women's rights. In fact, there's a deadly silence. So I get wheeled out very often to talk at these events. And I'm happy to keep being wheeled out because I'm not going to shut up until I have equal opportunities to the men in my field. And then there's this whole thing about scale. I work on a middle scale, sometimes a large scale. I also make work on a small scale with the wonderful Liz Agus. But we are rarely programmed in the big organisations at Sadler's Wells, at QEH, although I've just landed that gig, so that's great for us. So I don't understand it really. There's a big thing in The Guardian and various other nationals that I got involved with a couple of years ago where the director of Sadler's Wells just basically said, I don't programme women because the work doesn't stand up. So you can imagine the interesting conversation I had with Alistair after that comment. But, I'll come back to it later because I'm just trying to get through things because I'm running out of time. So what was the next question?
Engagement.
I just want to say a little bit about, I'm not going to talk about my work. If you want to look at my work, you can sort of go online and have a look, or come and see it live in spring, March next year. But I did want to say something about the way I run my company. Kids come on tour with us, they come into the making process with us, the nursery costs are shared, spouses, we pay for Polish spouses, husbands to come over, we put them up, it costs a lot of money. We bring people over from Costa Rica who work with me, we bring them over as a couple, they bring their children with them. We pay extra hotels for grandparents to come and stay on tour. And I'm now working with a rehearsal director who also has children, so we're applying the same rules for her. And I just want to say it's expensive taking, childcare seriously, and not all of us are in a position to do that, and I may not be for that much longer. But while I've got the access to be able to do that, I will do that for the people that I've worked with for over a decade. I think they deserve it. I wanted to say a little bit more about body fascism. I employ my peers, and we're all getting older, and our bodies are changing shape, and we're not so fit anymore, and we laugh about that. We find different physicalities. Some of my dancers are really my performers. People who work with me are very, very fit. Others are less fit. So I think it's the emphasis shifts as you work and grow older, and the work shifts and changes with you, and that's okay. We're not 22 anymore. We are adapting our work. I don't want to lead a bunch of nubile graduates in Vincent Dance Theatre, much as I love them. I don't think they have the life experience that my work now needs as I get older. And then just to go back to this, my work is political. It puts the issues and gender politics that I'm talking about right at the centre of the work, and it has done since 1994. The first piece that I made was based on Andrew Dworkin's Intercourse, which is a sort of really solid bit of feminist writing, if you want to have a read of that one. And all the work over the past 18 years has looked at motherhood, it's looked at infertility, it's looked at violence towards women, it's looked at the over-sexualisation of young girls, it's looked at ageing, oppression, pornography. It's been stimulated by feminist writers and feminist filmmakers. And like yourself, Jacky, I will continue to sort of speak out. I'm often asked to talk at these things, and I will continue to do so. As a final thing, I run a thing with Claire MacDonald, who's a founder of a very seminal experimental theatre cooperative called Impact Theatre. She and I run this thing called The Table. We co-direct it. You can go and look on the website, if you want to. And it's basically about that very thing of documenting her story. It's about capturing the voices of women makers across disciplines, putting them in sort of having curated conversations, recording events like this, and uploading these conversations. So there is a library of information about women's work, because no one else will do it for us. So I've taken action, and I'm documenting lots of important conversations that are happening, and it's all going online. And I'm building my own little British library of experienced female makers across disciplines. And if you want to have a look, there's the growings of conversations and dinner events that we have that capture what we actually do and map it out. Because I think it's important, otherwise all those ideas, all those thoughts, all that politics and all the work will just float away. And then in 20 years' time, people will be going, who was doing what?
Where are the women?
Where are the women, yeah. And then there'll be another article, and it'll be you guys talking to Luke Jennings, not me. And it's just depressing to think that we can't just mark it, put a line in the sand and say, enough's enough, we have to document our work, and we have to shout about our work, and we have to get people to sit up and notice that we are making good work. And it is on a variety of scales and in a variety of forms. And it crosses a lot of gender and racial and sexuality lines, and that's important. And now I'll shut.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Would you like to go next?
I will.
They're thinking we wish we'd gone down the pub now.
I suppose I want to start by saying that I'm not and haven't identified myself as a dancer, perhaps oddly, and I can explain it, but I won't do it now, for many, 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 many years. Although I've just made a piece of work with someone I trained with at the Royal Ballet in the 1960s called When We Were Birds, which I hope we'll be bringing to the UK in the spring, in which we revisit the contradictions of training to be ballet dancers at the same time as the 1960s was happening politically. Feminism was happening, and we were both communist inclined through our parents at the time. So we've done a piece from the waist up because we're too old to perform from the waist down. And we don't speak a word. We have video takes the whole narrative. And that's partly because my colleague has always been a dancer, and I think that it's the muteness of dancers that has always preoccupied me and made me decide that I would identify within theatre rather than dance. And I sometimes regret it and wish I'd said I was a dance theatre maker all these years, because it would have got me into the certain audiences I would have liked to have reached. However, I'm not going to do therapy on myself. I want to start on a quotation from Emmeline, who's sitting in the audience, talking about the 70s, because I think it relates to everything we're talking about. It relates to the performance we've seen tonight, and I hope it'll help sort of get me into a structure to talk to the questions that Jacky's asked. So very briefly, she says, "We felt urgently alive, passionate, convinced that we could speak, sing, act and write text with the same articulation as we could dance. We collaborated across disciplines. Musicians danced, visual artists spoke, dancers sang. Whether or not we had any skill in these different media was secondary to the drive to take hold of our own ideas and realise them in practice. We were hooked into the experiment, so here in the 1970s we researched, improvised, made music, taught our own classes, made costumes, props and sets, shared the financial outcomes, fused everything through and onto our own bodies. We were excited by process, not product. As Anna Furs remembers," that's me by the way, "our search for a new theatrical syntax operated as a form of controlled anarchy. We worked with a kind of psycho-emotional jazz. We prepared our mind-body instruments by reading, research and physical training, and then collided our imaginations together when devising." So it was out of this kind of ferment, through meeting Jacky and then working with the collective. And by the way, I'm a founder member of this collective, which has other members which we should mention later, because X6 extended when we took over this space and built it, actually with our own hands, those walls. And I think I would just want to say that in this very space, in 1983, before it was finished, I made a piece of work called Dirt. And it was about pornography. And it was with my company called Blood Group. It was our second piece of work. And we made it in freezing conditions in this space. And we were very keen to do, I really identify with some of the ways you were working tonight, because we were really keen to deal with a problem that I think female dancers have more than any other artist, which is the problem of the gaze, which is the audience sit there and they cannot help but look at your body, because it's your body through which you're communicating. And we took the issue of the sex industry and tried to break through what at the time were very puritanical and utopian feminist views of what was allowed and what wasn't allowed. I mean, I'm of the generation who used to walk through the streets and tell women who worked in the sex industry that they were being oppressed. I mean, how arrogant is that? But we did that in those days because we thought that that was the right thing to do. So when we made this performance called Dirt, we were really working, I translated a book on prostitutes' lives, and I was really interested in the kind of conundrums that existed within the idea of women performing, whether they perform in the sex industry or whether they perform in performance. And it was in this very space we made that work, and we made a lot of women at the time very angry, because we got naked, because we didn't shake our tush quite as much as you did, because we didn't use dance as a medium. We referred to dance, but we didn't dance as such. We did a whole pas de quatre to the Crystals, the 1960s group, who had a song, your very first number made me think of this, called He Hit Me and It Felt Like a Kiss. He hit me and I knew he loved me. He couldn't bear to hear me say I'd been with someone new, so he hit me and I was glad. So we ballet danced to this, okay? So that's kind of where have we got to. I think that we've got to the point where your generation is still needing to talk about these things. What's changed in between times is that our culture has become much more complex, much more multicultural. I think the educators who are training the next generation have gone through a completely different education system. I think, Emily, you were the first PhD in this country, dance. But, you know, you are absolutely that generation, that women who are teaching this younger generation have had a completely different opening and opportunity to explore not just postmodernism as an idea of form, but postmodernism as an intellectual field, which includes lots of political and philosophical thinking. And I think that kind of comes through, and it becomes like a DNA from our generation, so that when I see your work, I feel really connected to it, even though we've never met till tonight. So that's one thought about achievements. Achievements, I think, is the DNA. Okay, I think we've created a DNA. The challenge is the fatigue and the disengagement that so many women that I teach feel about feminism. The amount of times I hear younger women say, I don't identify as a feminist, but, you know, this kind of anxiety about what do we mean by feminism today, and almost like a sort of compassion fatigue with the idea that there can be the validity of such a movement. I cannot understand how there can be any question when we have cases of rape in India such as we've known in the past year. I mean, how on earth can we talk about the job is done, you know, women are in certain positions of power? I mean, that is just completely crazy, white world, first world thinking. It's not changed. Sadly, very little has changed, except a few women have got better careers, I think. I'm sort of thinking in the dance world of Tamara Roja. Charlotte set up a round table that I was part of, and I was really impressed with her. And I was really impressed with the fact that what that woman did is decide that she was going to be in charge. So she applied for all the big jobs and got one of them. I think that's very optimistic and very hopeful. What I don't understand quite is how one can work in ballet as a medium and a form as a political feminist. That contradiction I don't quite get. So yes, the problem of the woman dancer's body, I think, just goes on and on. I think the interdisciplinarity that we've seen tonight, I mean, I feel so much, not that your piece isn't completely unique, and very problematic to me, actually. I mean, I'd love to talk to you about it another time, but problematic in a positive way. But all the ingredients you have, I think, have a heritage. And it wasn't just women, actually, who created that language of breaking open the medium of performance. But I think we were perhaps very brave as a gender, because we had so much to be angry about. So I think your anger, I felt your anger tonight, and I liked that anger, and it made me feel connected to my own historical anger, my own contemporary anger. What was the third thing about engagement? Articulacy. I think the fact we're sitting here and talking tonight is... we didn't do it in the same way. I don't think we could have quite sat 30 years ago and had this kind of talk. We wrote it. I think we were quite frightened of talking out loud in public, and we never organised these sorts of debates. We did it much more in publishing, I think. We felt safer, perhaps, with that, and with making work. I think what's come through now is that women who work in dance and performance using their bodies also feel they can speak, as well as publish and write. So I'll shut up now, but I think that's kind of what tonight's made me think about.
I'll just say that I've got to go because I've got a young man.
He's been
And
very
I'm really
patient.
sorry because I'd really like to hear you talk about your work. But I just want to say that, it's really interesting having a young man at times. I think women have also been at the forefront of constructing alternative families. And I'm part of that. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Emily.
I think I relate to so much of what everyone has been saying, and I think an achievement for women has been to a certain extent to like reclaim our body. I feel like I have a lot of freedom now, especially on stage, because of the kind of work that has gone before me and a lot of the dismantling of kind of what a dancer is supposed to be and who they're supposed to be satisfying. So I think, although we're not there yet, I think we have come a long way. And also I think that thing of prioritising experience and really, using your body as a valid way of expressing that, because I mean traditionally the body was seen as feminine and seen as lesser and shameful and, you know, all these really kind of prehistoric things, and then theory and intelligence were kind of located somewhere else that wasn't body. And then the fact that bodies can be so easily like suppressed and oppressed, and they have to be really controlled, especially in like dance training. I think like ballet is the extreme form of that, but then I think a lot of contemporary dance schools still really thrive on controlling the body, and creating a kind of competitiveness and a fixedness of how that body is supposed to be, which actually, if I relate it back to my own practice, it's made me have so many questions about what on earth I'm supposed to do now I'm out of training, where I'm out of this really it's like looking back on an experience and realising how rigid it was, and realising how much I was swept up in a lot of that, and think, oh yeah, this thing of measuring success, oh yeah, I can do that, and so then I'm successful, and then realising actually that a lot of those structures to do with success are completely masculine, and I just can't fit myself into them at all. So then I think a challenge that women face, it is this like fixedness of what dance should be, because I think it can make, as a woman, it can make you feel very replaceable. It's like, oh, my leg doesn't go that high. Okay, so you'll pick the dancer whose leg does go that high. Or, the body can become very, replaceable. And I think we do still struggle with visibility, and I don't know if that is as much a female fault as a masculine one, because everyone's asking where the women are, and it's like, we're all here. We all make work, we do things, we work really hard, but somehow there's like this connection that's not really making sense. It's like a lot of my female contemporaries' work is being quite discounted, while the men are like, and they just like, somehow they leave school and they just keep going. I think it's because, this is a massive generalisation, but a lot of men go into dance as like the rebels. It's like they weren't supposed to dance, so they kind of get this crazy special treatment of like, jump more, do more, woo, and it kind of, then it just accelerates. Like once they leave college, it's almost like, then they get seized up, and I've never ever heard a man be called an emerging artist, and I always hear a woman be called an emerging artist. Men don't need to emerge. Like they're like the new promising talent, and the women are like, oh yeah, you're emerging, and no, you can't apply for that much money because you haven't quite got the status, and do you mind terribly if you don't maybe get paid for that job, because there's all this stuff that I think women have to keep fighting against. So in my own practice, I think I'm really striving to articulate a lot of things, and this thing of writing and writing your own history. Like Jamila and I are publishing a book, and I think that really came out of trying to contextualise our piece, trying to have a place for the anger of the piece, but also not make it feel like that is like we're blaming anyone for what's going on, but that these things still happen. So giving visibility to certain female experiences, but also realising that we're all implicated in it. Like it's all, like patriarchy is my fault as much as it's man's fault. Like we're all part of a system. And then I'm really questioning this thing you're saying about with X6 and how when Margaret Thatcher came in and there were lots of art cuts, it's kind of happening again. So I've got a lot of questions about how to make a sustainable practice. especially when I'm not interested in form. I'm interested in visual imagery a lot, but I don't really like explosive dance. I don't like seeing, so maybe it's that thing, the time we live in, it's very like, all these images have to be really easily got and taken and then like consumed, and then we know we've seen a really good piece of dance because, you know, it had crazy, great things in it that we could really get very quickly, rather than anything that's slightly more complex and takes a bit more time and maybe makes you feel uncomfortable or question or, So, I hope that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I'm completely knackered. Sorry, my head is kind of reeling. I maybe will kind of respond a little bit to things that have been said. I think the thing that's burning a bit in me right now is this thing of age and youth, and how graduating, I felt like I had to kind of wait for 5 years before anyone I was interested in working with would be interested in working with me. And that's it's like things have flipped. It used to be that youth was the thing, the young dancer with this agile body was what was desired, and now it's experience and age and wisdom. And I'm just like waiting for that stuff to come. And then I think, oh shit, like, what about now? Like, what can I be now? And who is, like, I do have feelings, I do have experience, I do have things to say, and where's the place for that? And for me, that kind of flip relates also to, or is the same, similar to this thing of being a black dancer and being a minority in the contemporary dance world, and then there being a big push, kind of at the time when I was at the place, a push for more black people to be involved in dance, getting more, especially black men in dance schools, and then I was
So fetish.
and I was a kind of poster girl for the place, and I was on their prospectus for like 3 years or whatever. I think I'm still in the programmes at Sad as well, and I felt really, like, no one asked me, do you want to be on the prospectus? It was like, oh look, it's so exciting, so great, you're on the cover of the prospectus, and all I felt was a black woman in a gold dress there to sell a school that wants to get more black people there. Like, that is also this really awkward flip of something that was undesirable now being desirable, and then it's just another extreme kind of unbalance that I'm not interested in. I think a 5-year-old, if she was articulate enough, like if she was given the tools to be articulate, would be fascinating to work with and have like experiences that would be so kind of intriguing and curious to know about, given like if she had this articulation. And I think I do feel a bit, in terms of challenges, I do feel a bit excluded from certain things because of my youth, which is a bit awkward. I feel very uncomfortable talking in terms of the masculine and the feminine and the male and the female, and also in terms of scale, like the small scale, medium scale, and large scale. I mean, my idea would be to work in the space that the work that I'm making most needs, specific to that moment and that piece of work. And like, we talk a lot about scale. Like yesterday we were talking with a friend of ours who's a dancer, and just, you know, how do we scale up? Like, how can we go to the next level? How can we get into these other spaces? And I'm really like tired of that conversation.
It's also a conversation that you have to justify. Like if you apply to Arts Council, they're like, why are you scaling up? Why and how and all these.
So I think that's it. This question of scale is a challenge, just because I'm not interested in having that discussion in any way, but yet you're forced to all the time. This thing of anger, this is a challenge. How not to seem angry.
Yeah.
And sometimes even if, I mean, with physicality or being physical, like, I don't know, in dance school or whatever, like, I have a tendency to be maybe aggressive. I have an aggressive kind of physicality, you could say that. But then I don't connect that necessarily to anger. And this thing of how we read bodies and how we read gestures and the emotional content of them, or the kind of the implication, the meaning that they carry. I find that to be a challenge. Like how can we just be and be multiple without kind of immediately being shut down? Like if I stamp, I'm angry. But it's like, no, what I stamp and I'm loving the stamping. Like how can we do away with these ideas of this means that and that means this? I think this is still a challenge for us to do work. And I think that's me.
Can I quickly, when I said I identify with your anger, it was absolutely not about your stamping feet. It was to do with your dramaturgy.
No.
It was to do with the structures of the relationship between sound and the choice of action and images. You know, it wasn't literal at all.
It wasn't specific to you at all.
No, but I know, but I'm just thinking, I think, because I just, you know, from the moment you started, I did read Two Women Who Are Going to Take Us on a ride, which you did.
I'm just thinking about a bit of... Sorry.
It's just because it's fine to be angry. You know, if you can...
This is the thing,
it's absolutely fine. My first 3 or 4 duets and trios were furious. And, you know, I've had promoters saying to me, oh, you used to make angry work, didn't you? And it does mellow a bit with time. You know, I don't know how old you guys are. How old are you?
26.
Is everyone going to say how old they are?
Yeah, I'm 45.
I'm 63.
I'm 60.
And I think when I was your age, I just want to check in to see if I could say this.
Yeah.
When I was your age, I was making much more angry work. And it does mellow, it's such a cliche. But, you know, in the same way that's a cliche, you've got to understand that that is a metaphor and a cliche and a very well, easily read gesture. So you can't get away from the history of what gestures and certain physical archetypes mean. You just can't.
It's true, but
It's codified language.
Yeah.
And actually, I recognise a lot of place dancing tonight. You know, I think it's going to take you a while to lose and shed the form that you've inherited through your training. And I would say, shed it. You know, keep shedding it, because you've obviously got so much to say. It's not that I'm dissing it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think these guys kind of know what they're doing.
Yeah.
So, I mean, not that, you know, but...
No, I'm saying that the form
yeah.
that your body occupies is the form that the training has put into your body,
Yeah,
that you've absorbed.
yeah.
And all I'm saying is I could see it.
Yes, exactly.
Some of those things
yes.
played out, and some of those things were borrowed from other pornographic or hip-hop or whatever culture. And some of them are very easily read. So you do have to know dramaturgically and compositionally what you're doing with those images in order to have the impact with an audience that you want to have. And I think you do know what you're
Can I
doing.
just interrupt for a second? Because I'd just like to pick up on the point about the divisiveness of the different issues of of age, women, black women in dance. You know, I mean, that deserves a whole evening in itself. It's, I think that issue about a kind of, if you like, a sort of dominant status quo or a patriarchy or the system or the dreadful economic climate we're in, you know, there is a sort of overarching ideology there, and I do believe that there's an interest in keeping oppressed groups, if you like, divided. So, you know, whenever there's a little sort of schism or you know, so I think, yes, we need to identify the specific issues around those different oppressions, but I think we also share a lot. And sometimes I feel, you know, that it's in... But hey, we've been talking a lot. We did suggest...
Can I pick up on one more thing? Because I think
Yeah.
the thing that you were saying about being the poster girl is really interesting. Like, I want to ask you, because it came up with Tamara Rojo in our conversation. I mean, I won't quote her, but she was saying that the women in her ballet company really don't speak.
Yes.
So I wanted to say to you, why didn't you, or maybe you did, go to the administration and say, you haven't got permission to use my image. I'm not comfortable with you using my image. I think it's a sort of financial act, and I'm not a commodity.
Because
So
it
did
took
you
me
not feel
time.
able to say that?
I didn't even think to say that. I mean, it's presented as a kind of accolade. Like, look, you're in the director's office and she's got a big poster of you. Like, everything's gone to print. There are
But
stacks
without
and
your
stacks of
permission?
them. Without anything in it. I mean, if that happened now, that would be a very different situation. But then,
Well, I suppose you're within an institution, but I suppose I'm interested in the silencing of how you felt silence, because I think in a way what threads all of us together is that is, you know, often it does come out as anger, but what threads us together, I think, is a desire not to be shut up and not to be silenced, and we've got something to say, and do you want to hear it? You know, it's really a question. It doesn't have to be, you're gonna fucking hear it. It can be, do you want to hear it? It's quite interesting. You know, it's a proposal, it's a proposition. So I just think that in our culture, it's still the dominant culture for men to have the voices, for men, to use your phrase, to take up the space. I'm just developing a space in Brighton at the moment because I am so tired of working to other people's rules that I want to be in control of my own space now. You know, do you know what I mean? So I think over years of longevity of practice, you start to work out what it is that you need that will serve what you are trying to do. And I think it does change over time, actually, without being in any way patronising. I think it does.
Can I just sort of assert my position as chair here slightly? I was just, we had thought that we might have a little bit of a discussion amongst ourselves after we'd all contributed. But I'm just thinking about the time, and actually I'm aware of these lovely people here, and I'm sure some people have got some questions like to open it. And also I think we've all said what we want to say, and I think that in a sense, stand alone, honour that, you know, we don't need to unpick each other's stuff. Let's open it up. So I think if anyone's got any questions or they'd like to make a contribution, there's a microphone, so...
I was just going to say about the thing of not saying anything when you were up and coming. I don't think I knew that. I wouldn't have said anything at that age either. It's only through age and experience you learn that you should have said something. But when you're up and coming, of course you're not going to, because, well, you might if you're plucky enough, but being very plucky now, it would have taken me a long time to get that confidence as a woman, maybe up until I was about 30. And that's, you know, a sizable age. I didn't really assert myself.
Can I just say it's absolutely not a criticism
of
of you in that moment. It's more of what makes us not speak out.
Yeah, exactly. But I was just relating to
I wouldn't have done
things I look back on and think, well, why didn't I say anything? You know.
But I do think there's also, you know, the forms attract people for a certain reason. And I think that, you know, moving, knowing that you can express yourself. I went into dance because I had a hideous childhood, and it was where I could express my feelings non-verbally. I chose to do it non-verbally. I think that there's, you know, we have to also acknowledge that the form itself kind of draws people prefer to work without having to speak. Otherwise, you would be a verbal artist or a. And some people choose to be physical and verbal, which I chose to be eventually. But, you know, I think that the contradiction is that just because you've chosen to work in a medium which is non-verbal doesn't mean that outside of that medium you might not have things to say.
It also doesn't mean that the medium itself can't speak, because I think it was a very clear decision for me and Tamila to not speak in our show.
Yeah.
But to play that edge of whether or not that then made us feel like we were a subject of something else, like external happening to us, or whether or not we could still push through and feel empowered and still have something to say, but not close it down with language, because I think language does shut things down. But this is why dance is so great, because you can diversify all these gestures and these assumptions that people make in everyday life. On stage, you can question all those and you can challenge all of those.
And there was a lot of language in your mise en scène. I mean, your plants spoke, you know, and you had your text. So, you know, it was very rich in that sense. Are there any other questions from the floor or statements?
I have a question about the exposure. In the very beginning, I felt the most oppressive sexual physicality happened when we were clothed, almost bowing before this history or knowledge that eventually became revealed. And that was the most shocking, actually, moment. It wasn't about taking off a shirt or underwear or whatever. And I wonder how you feel about that act of revealing yourself and the different parts and why you chose to do that. at certain times? Was it structured? Did you want us to go through that process with you? Oh, there, now she's doing this, tits, oh, her vagina's here. Because it became, as a spectator, I was not, I didn't want to be shocked, it wasn't shocking to me, but I wanted to know if you wanted to place it at certain times with a purpose.
I think like the overriding thing is that question of like how to be, and I suppose the more you reveal, the more you're kind of engaging in that question. But I don't know if you want to say. I think for me it was structural though as well. Like the piece thing, I'm so quite strange, but I was like, the piece maybe wants me to be naked now, so then I was naked. You know, yeah.
But there's, I mean, I ask you the question really. I ask you the question of that I've kind of raised that, you know, when we play with, as women, when we play with our erotic presence, what is our responsibility towards ourselves and our gender and our spectator? And I'm interested in how you've negotiated those questions when you've made this work, because it's really, it's not that, you know, you want every woman performer to never take her clothes off. That's, we've gone way beyond that. But it seems that when I look at your generation, you know, you're the generation who've also had feminist burlesque. You've had all kinds of renegotiations of the naked body and the sexualized body. You've had arguments about, you know, whether pole dancing is a feminist act. You've had arguments about whether working in the sex industry is inhabiting your own body and doing what you want with it. You know, you've moved the agenda on so much, your generation. I'm just really interested in how you... It's the same sort of question, but from another perspective. Like, it's a problem. So how do you recognise the problem that you've posed us as a spectator?
So could you explain erotic presence?
Well, I mean, you know, you're beautiful women and you take your clothes off and people are watching and there's men in the audience and women in the audience who enjoy, whether they like it or not, the fact that you're gorgeous, okay? That's a kind of bottom line that we can all agree. Then we've got the intellectual kind of arguments about what are we looking at and, you know, are we gazing, are we objectifying, are we not objectifying? That's inevitable. We cannot look at women perform, I maintain we cannot look at women perform, even today, without noticing whether they're clothed, naked, you know, slim, fat, black, white, able-bodied. We cannot ignore that we're looking at a woman's body.
Yeah, but there's a kind of scrutiny that's just embedded in our culture.
But I'm asking how you negotiate it.
You cannot ignore that from a man either, and you just related erotism with nakedness, and I think...
No, I haven't.
Well, maybe that's what
I don't, by the way.
Sorry. I'm sorry. You said something about when you present your body as a... I cannot quote the sentence, but there was the word erotism, and I suppose there was, because they just, at different parts, they just changed their clothes, and I thought there is a part of the fact that, yes, if you present a naked body, some people may see it as erotism, but it's not in the body.
No, I'm not talking about the nakedness at all. I'm saying the erotic is there whether you've got, you know, whether you're dressed. It's not, the erotic is there, it's a given. How you manipulate then nudity on top of that, or erotic dancing on top of that, complicates it, but it's there anyway.
Yeah. I think sorry, I just think your question...
It's in the eye of the person who watches. It's not...
I ask anyone here to say they did not watch the performance tonight with an awareness that that eroticism was being referenced. Did anyone here look at this performance and not think that eroticism was being referenced? I'd love to know.
It was anti-erotic by mocking erotism, but it's in us decide whether that's erotic. Some people may come here and say, wow, that's erotic, but I didn't feel aroused. Independently
I'm not talking about arousal.
No.
Oh, I didn't feel that's an erotic image.
It's just,
because for many reasons.
Which is fair enough.
Also because I know them.
Can I contribute here?
Yes.
I just sort of in answer to your question, I felt that the conceptual framing was held all the way through the performance. And it took me back to many works here, radical performances here actually, in which as the performer we were really kind of exploring the objectivity and the subjectivity simultaneously. It was a very, very tricky thing to do. You're stepping inside and outside of the performance all the time. And that's what I saw you doing. And I saw that strategy. I said to you about post-modern strategy. I saw them there. So I thought some of the imagery was more controlled than other moments. But I think this sort of the sexualization of everybody really is like rampant and worse than it was actually in the 70s. And I can't see how, as a young woman performers, you could not work with it as material. I think it's you know, I can see how you'd be driven to. So I think I just wanted to say that I felt that even though it seemed chaotic at times, you never ever lost control of the frame, the conceptual frame of what you're doing. I felt like I was engaged with the discourse, whether or not I was aroused or whatever.
Can we take the heat off these two a little bit? Because I feel like we've sort of need to broaden it out a little bit, because I think you're going to come across this a lot next week, unless you want to carry on. I feel like you're sort of being scrutinised a little bit.
Useful. Any more questions?
Or thoughts on what's been said, maybe, so far?
My question is for Charlotte, and it's kind of unrelated to dance and dance theory, but more about the issue that the person was political. I was really, really impressed to hear that you employ dancers who are mothers, who are fathers, who are older, more or less able-bodied. Because as someone who isn't a dancer, but someone who watches dance, it's kind of a relief to see different forms of people. And I kind of have two questions. One is, are you unique in this, or are there other groups? I mean, I've seen less able-bodied dancers, but not so much older women. Definitely not women that look like they've given birth to 4 children, maybe once, I think. And I'm not the most educated in the dance world, but I think I'm kind of a standard spectator. And the second, if the person is political, I'd like to know, are you in any way using your decision to support childcare, to bring grandmothers to look after the kids, etc., in collaboration with other organisations that are trying to do the same thing? So the schools that have childcare there for the teachers who need to look after them, or an office, or something completely unrelated to the dance world. Is there any kind of collaboration here to take up to a governmental level in which you say freelance dancers, freelance any woman, freelance any man should be able to have these kind of provisions? How much does the dance world engage with anything that's outside of the dance world in order to take things forward for women and men in these positions?
There's about 100 questions in here just
Yeah, I know.
So I'll try and answer at least 99 of them.
Yeah.
I mean, basically and again, this comes with maybe diversifying one's practice as one gets older. That as a national portfolio organisation, I choose to spend my funding not only on making dance anymore. So the table that I mentioned earlier is funded through my NPO. Women's leadership stuff is funded through the NPO. Mentoring is funded through the same funding. Childcare, and the way that I try to operate the company, which isn't always possible, but I try very hard to do this. What happens in the studio, we try to reflect in the organisational structure of the administration as well. So almost everybody that joins me as a woman seems to have a lot of children as an administrator or a manager. And we try to have improved conditions for them as well. So I don't know if I'm making any sense, I try to reflect what happens in normal society for mums and dads into the dance world, which is a complex world, because as we're talking about, it's already a lot of body issues and a lot of prejudice, I think, wouldn't be too strong a word, against women artists fighting for their space. So I try to sort of let the ethos of what happens in a studio, which is why I was going on about collaboration and sort of circles rather than triangles with someone at the top, And of course I can be really, really firm as a director. That's not what I'm talking about. That's a different skill. But when you're directing, it's not because my name's on the door that I'm going to pyramidal structure. It's because I'm the director. So I'm really clear about that. And that's tricky. There's a whole load of questions around that as a woman about, you know, directing men, directing other women. At what point you separate from the ensemble and you become the person that has the last say when you've worked collaboratively for 8 out of 10 weeks, and then suddenly you start going, oh, hang on, guys, I'm making decisions now. That's very complicated. That's not answering your question. What was the question?
About if the dance world.
Yes. So one of the, sorry, I know what I was saying. So one of the things that I do with Dance UK, which is a national organisation, is a couple of years ago I published a pregnancy and parenthood report, which we interviewed, case studied quite a few dance makers in the UK who have had children, mostly women, I have to say, and put their case studies into a report. You can get it on my website. And that was distributed wider than the dance world. And that's basically saying, whilst in the real world, in real society, whilst there's no, you know, very few women at board, executive, in the boardroom, while there's very few women in executive levels in finance or legal systems or business or whatever, you know, name your choice, our dance world reflects what happens in society. And that's why we're disappointed, because we think that we're liberal, fantastic, creative people.
It's still the same game.
It's the same game, and you're absolutely right to sort of go, I was emerging for 15 years. I've only just stopped emerging. I'm 45, for Christ's sake. I was like, can people stop saying that I'm emerging, please? I really have been doing this quite a long time. So it is, I totally feel your frustration. But you sort of have to earn your stripes as well, so there's a bit of that going on as well. But no, we're very inward looking in the dance world, and actually I'm going the opposite way of Anna. I'm actually I'm more interested in, say, being at the QEH than I am at Sadler's Wells, for example, because I'm no longer satisfied with what the dance world offers me. I'm more interested in calling it performance than theatre or dance, or even dance theatre, to the point where I've even thought about changing the name of the company. We work across disciplines. Everything that you said about that article, or that was in Evelyn's book about, you know, singers who dance, musicians who act, dancers who play, or whatever. That's exactly what we do. And you're never going to reinvent the wheel, you know, but you should at least acknowledge where your heritage lies. So for me, my influences are forced entertainment. You know, look around you. This is forced entertainment. It isn't forced entertainment. You know, the influences are really clear. It's Impact Theatre. It's DV8. It's whoever else it is that's influenced my practice. And I think it's important that we acknowledge who has influenced us, because we're not reinventing the wheel. And as an artist, you know, I try to be original. I try to find my own voice. I try to work with collaborators who I really respect. But at the same time, there's a backstory. You know, you guys started it, and I respect that, and I'll acknowledge that. I think the trouble in the dance world is that we all think that we're so original that we're not saying thanks, guys, to the people that came before us. And we should, I think.
Yeah, I think we didn't start it either, because it was going on in the United States before us.
It was going on in German Express, you know, I mean...
German Express, we can go back and back
European
and back.
American influences,
Did that answer your question at all? It probably didn't. I try to look out with the company and how it behaves, so I'm happy to talk about these issues outside of the dance world as well as in it.
I don't think this current government's that interested in raising the level of childcare for freelance artists, actually.
Or for any other.
It's not high on its agenda, and nor was the previous
Well, they
government.
still want us to study proper subjects.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, yeah, we need proper maths and science.
And yet, in the same breath, they're publishing
stop
things
us,
that are
are we?
saying...
No, but I'm saying I don't think I think that kind of battle for, you know, I don't think that Charlotte could change very much on that front. I think it's so dire at the moment.
But you know what does change? Say someone like Antonia Grove, who's the generation below me, maybe she's sort of maybe 10 years younger than me, and she runs a company called Probe. I had a really interesting conversation with her where she sort of said, and she's a mum, you know, too, and she said, do you put childcare? And I went, yeah, go on, just put it in.
Yeah.
Just put it in and see what happens. And she got it. But it just takes someone older just going, just do it, you know.
Well, in company terms, yes, but I think in terms of affecting a government policy...
But what I'm saying is inherent mentoring in how we behave as mature women. We can give advice and sort of just devil-may-care attitudes.
I can see that we're going to have to sort of bring it to a close very, very, very soon. But I think maybe we've got one more question now.
Hi, it's just framing a question that I'm facing myself. Placing anyone on stage, I think, is political, whether it's a woman or a man. But my question would be, what do you think is the difference in between a piece about women and a feminist piece?
A piece about women?
A piece about women that would portray women, that would, I don't know,
or a feminist piece.
A piece that would have a feminist engagement, commitment to that direction. What would be the difference? What do you think?
That's a sort of huge question, actually.
I can try and answer that.
Well, I just wanted to say, well...
Can I answer it very quickly?
Yeah.
I will agree.
And I'll say my bit too.
I think that a feminist piece would give women the opportunity to be equal to men in everything that happens in that piece of work. And a woman's piece may focus on one part of being a woman that may have nothing to do with equality.
So you think equality?
Equality is what drives my politics.
I mean, I saw a piece recently and it was like, oh, it sounds awful, it would be awful. It was basically like watching what a man thinks a woman orgasms like. It was really like, the women were in drag and that was kind of refreshing because you don't see so much of it, but they looked so instructed. So it was a piece about being a woman, but it wasn't feminist because all the women were doing these things and there was no equality because it was such like this instant, like satisfying kind of thing that's not really how a woman, I don't know.
Can I also venture to say, I don't know, this is my age speaking, but I'm not utopian anymore. So I don't think that I can make a feminist piece that has an agenda that tidies anything up, and I don't think I ever have done in a way. I think it's the problems that are exciting and interesting. I think it's the problems that you've raised tonight that excite me, not the answers you've given to anything. It's the grit, it's the provocation. I think we can be utopian and political in how we organise ourselves economically, but the work itself can't really be feminist, really, because what does that mean? It's too complex in itself, that word. But I think if it's made by a certain ethos, then you could say perhaps that it falls into a feminist category. But for me, these days, I can't. It's so in my DNA that I'm a feminist that I can't describe my work as feminist anymore because I just assume it is. Then I can move on to talk about what the work is
That's
doing.
the thing, it's all about moving on, isn't it?
It's all about moving on, and I think too, absolutely, just
segueing.
Just to move on. I mean, I think it's been a sort of excellent level and quality of input and discussion. I'm sorry we've run out of time. I'm sure people have got more questions. I mean, I think it's great that we've had an evening titled Feminism and Dance, because the word, I think, has been somewhat demonised, neglected for several decades, and it does seem to be back on the agenda. For me, feminism is a tool, and I think it's a useful tool. You know, it doesn't have to define our work entirely. We can develop our individual and unique different voices, but it is a tool that can bring us together, give us strength and solidarity, and a political articulation. So thank you very much to our speakers and our artists tonight. Thank you. It's been very rich.
Can I just, for the sake of history, because this is my politics are to do with my sense that history needs to be acknowledged and recognised for both men and women, actually. Can I just put some names to you that are people who made this space, who are not here tonight? Because Emmeline was here. There's Doug Gill, and Phil Jack, and Chris Cheek, and Patricia Birdie, and Susie Gilmore, and Mary Prestige, and Fergus Early. And I think it's important to recognise that history, because everything we talked about comes out of those people as well in terms of this space tonight.
Hurrah for them!
There will be be an opportunity to meet some of those people at an event called an X6 Round Table on October the 20th. Yeah, so.
Okay, thank you very much.